So you're looking at buying a home in St. Augustine, Florida in 2025, and I can't blame you. Whether you're moving here for the lifestyle, the great schools, or you just want to be a beach bum in retirement. We have all possibilities available here in St. Augustine, and it truly is a great place to live. But if you are looking to make the move, I wouldn't do so without knowing the 5 things I'm going to cover in this video. We're going to talk about property taxes, we're going to talk about insurance and flood zones, we're also going to take a look at inventory in the area, we're going to talk about incentives, and we're also going to talk about new construction and how it's affecting our local market. What's up everyone, it's Thomas with Real Broker here in St. Augustine, Florida, and if you're looking to buy, sell, or invest here in Northeastern Florida, make sure you reach out to me and my team. All we try to do is give you the information so that you can make an educated decision on what you want to do, which is buy, sell, or invest here in the area. So the first thing we're going to talk about is property taxes here in the state of Florida. And maybe you heard that Ron DeSantis pushed a bill forward saying, I want to completely eliminate property taxes for all Floridians that consider this their primary residence. And that is, of course, to battle the cost of living crisis that we do have here and the affordability crisis that we have across the entire state of Florida. But as of right now, nothing has changed. So we're going to continue on and just talk about what property taxes are like in the state of Florida as of right now. So the first thing that you need to know is that on average across St. Johns County, your property taxes are going to be about 1.4% of your purchase price. So if you're buying a $100,000 home, your property tax is going to be around $1,400 a year. If you're buying a $1 million home, your property taxes are going to be like $14,000 a year. So you can pretty much figure out the math in between there. It's about on average 1.4%. You can see in some areas higher like downtown St. Augustine and St. Augustine Beach, and you can see some areas that are lower like in my area here in West Augustine where my taxes are like 1.23% of the purchase price. But just to give you a good general rule of thumb, 1.4% for the entire county, it'll give you a good idea of what your taxes are going to be on an annual basis. The other thing that you need to know about property taxes here in the state of Florida is that many people who have their primary residence here homestead their property, which the homestead exemption is something that's offered by the state of Florida that is supposed to give you some tax savings, right? So the homestead exemption gives you $50,000 off your taxable value, and it also gives you a cap of 3% of your property taxes being raised year over year. So the most that they can raise your property taxes on a homesteaded property is 3% if it's your primary residence. So that does lead to some confusion, especially when you're trying to estimate property taxes from some of the figures that you might find on Zillow or Realtor.com, because they are not always accurate. So for example, if you found a home that was bought 10 years ago for, let's say, $100,000 for easy math, their property taxes are probably around $1,400 a year. And if they had it homesteaded, that means that $1,400 a year was only increased by 3% each year for the past 10 years. So when you're looking at today's market, and that now, let's say that $100,000 home is now a $400,000 home, it's going to make a big change in what that property tax bill is going to be. So the property taxes on a $400,000 house are going to be around $5,600. And this is where the problem lies, is when you look at the previous years as you're scrolling through Zillow, they're pulling the tax information from the tax bill that they paid the previous year. So it could give you some pretty misleading information on what your tax bill actually is. And I haven't had this happen to any of my customers, but I've heard some horror stories from other agents where they were showing a buyer a property that they loved. They closed on that property, and then a year later their tax bill doubled or tripled because they weren't aware and their lender didn't inform them that taxes were going to change because it's based off of the new purchase price. Whenever you buy or sell a property, that is a triggering event for taxes to be reassessed. So as you're shopping and looking around at homes here in St. Augustine, just keep that in mind. And the one good thing is you can always reference the property appraiser website, which I'll show you right now. So what I did for the purpose of this video is I used an extreme example. So if you go and you look at St. Augustine Lakes, this is a Lennar community. This is 28 River Strand Lane in St. Augustine, Florida. This is a great little community. I've put 2 families in there and they absolutely love it. It's close to downtown, close to the beach, and you get a brand new house with more than likely a 4.99 or a 5.5% interest rate. So for this example, I thought it was a good idea to use because when you're talking about property taxes and you're looking at new construction, especially in a master plan community, they're going to be basing those property taxes a lot of the times off of the land that was purchased in order to build this subdivision. So it's going to be way different than what it typically is. And the reason I wanted to use a new construction home is because a lot of times, especially when it comes down to the estimators on a lot of these sites like Zillow, Redfin, Realtor.com, they're going to pull the tax bill from the old piece of land that it was before. So when these builders come in, they're buying acres and acres and acres, and then they're subdividing all these things into tinier parcels. So that tax data reflects the older parcel when it was a piece of land, so it's not accurate, and it's normally extremely cheap when you're looking at property taxes, so it can throw off your numbers completely. So if we look at the property appraiser website, they have a great website here in St. Johns County, and many of the counties in Florida have the same kind of setup, but you can just type in the address here. It'll pull up the exact property, 28 River Strand Lane right here, and then you can also see a whole bunch of other information about the property. But for our purposes, what we want to do is go to the tax estimator for St. Johns County. This pulls in the millage rate, so you're going to know just about exactly what your taxes are going to be, and then you can also add exemptions to it. So as you can see here, they have the just market value of $80,000. That's based off of the land it was previously on. That home was listed for $365,000, so let's just go ahead and run with it. If this is a primary residence, which a lot of the people that are relocating to our area are doing, you're going to homestead that property so that you get the benefits of the homestead exemption, that $50,000 off your taxable value, as well as the 3% cap year over year on your taxes being raised. Your taxes for a $365,000 property are going to be around $4,000 for the year, $4,097.55 to be exact. This is normally high. What I'm normally finding is that it's coming somewhere between 80 to 90% of that amount that's on the property tax appraiser website. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about if you're looking to buy a home in St. Augustine in 2025 is going to be insurance and flood zones. And this is a question that I get all the time, especially from people that aren't familiar with how the state of Florida operates and what's going on with insurance. So let's first talk about the insurance market here. Now, you've probably seen throughout the news or social media that insurance premiums have gone up drastically here in the state of Florida. And I'm not saying that they haven't, but typically those drastic increases in premiums are coming from areas that lie in a flood zone or are waterfront. And that's, outside of that, we are seeing insurance premiums, but really not to the same multitude that they're seeing on the water or in a flood zone outside of flood zone X. So the insurance problem here in Florida is a problem, don't get me wrong, and they're putting legislation forward, and it seems like they're talking about it every single day. I think it is going to get addressed here in the next couple of years, because if they don't, we're going to have a huge problem in our hands in terms of just being affordability in terms of insurance. But aside from that, in northeastern Florida, insurance is not as big of a problem as it is when we're seeing in the Panhandle or in South Florida. That's really where a lot of the news is coming from the larger metropolitan areas in the southern part of the state, where they're more prone to hurricanes and they're sitting in flood zones. Here in northeastern Florida, we actually aren't as much of a hurricane risk as the rest of Florida. Major hurricanes within St. Johns County have only made landfall 4 times over the past 120 years, where if you look at like South Florida or the Panhandle, you're going to find that it's hitting them all the time, and they're just getting hit with a lot heavier hurricanes, a larger category of hurricane than we are here. Because of that, South Florida has a different building code than North Florida does. The main thing that people are wondering is like, how much is insurance going to cost me here in northeastern Florida? And the one thing I will say is that if you're buying a home past 2002, you're more than likely going to be pretty surprised with how affordable homeowners insurance is here in St. Johns County. And that's because if a home was built after March 1st of 2002, new Florida building codes were enacted in a result because of the major hurricanes that happened and caused devastation across the state. Florida put out new building codes, so all the homes built after that point are built to a higher standard than the homes previous. Just to give you a quick example, on that new construction home there that I just showed you in St. Augustine Lakes by Lennar, you're probably going to spend at most about $150 a month for a homeowner's insurance policy. And if you wanted to add flood insurance, it's not mandatory in that area because you're in flood zone X. That's where you're not required to have flood insurance. It's probably going to cost you somewhere between $400 and $600 for the year. I bought my house back in 2023. It's a $300,000 house in a no HOA in flood zone X, and it's roughly 1,200 square feet. My flood insurance for the year is $450. So we opted to get it because, who knows? Why not? Just get it as a blanket coverage just in case. Okay, so now that you guys have that background on insurance, we're going to talk about flood zones. And that's going to be the main thing that is going to drive those insurance costs up. It's going to be what flood zone you're in. Now, the majority of Florida is going to be in flood zone X. But if you're by the intercoastal, you're by the river, you're by the beach, more than likely you're going to fall in another flood zone that will require you to have flood insurance if you have a mortgage on that property. So if there is a property that you're interested in, the best thing to do is reach out to me and I'll help you through it. Or if you just want to do some research on your own, there's the FEMA flood maps, which is the best resource that I can find, and it's the one that I use all the time to give me the information on what flood zone a home is in. So we're going to take our example property here and we're going to plug it into the FEMA flood maps. Let's check it out. Okay, so we got 28 Riverstrand Lane in St. Augustine, Florida. We're going to search that up. Now, as of right now, the FEMA flood map isn't 100% up to date in where this property is. They don't have updated images here, but as you can see, it's not in a colored area. You can see flood zone A over here. This is flood zone X. So when you don't see a colored area, you're going to be fine. Now, what I do want to point out is that if you were to zoom out here and you were to go over to, now what I do want to point out is that you can go over to St. Augustine Beach here. So we have the city of St. Augustine Beach right over here. And you can see that it's going to lie primarily in flood zones. And the one thing that's really interesting is that we do need to check certain things within the flood zone. So when we're taking a look here, you see this orange area and it says the city of St. Augustine. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it is in a flood zone. It's just in an area where I have to reference to an insurance carrier to figure out if this area is in a flood zone or not. So right now we're getting over to St. Augustine Beach. You can see that this whole area is in the section of City of St. Augustine Beach. But I know for a fact that there's neighborhoods right over here that sit in flood zone X. There's areas over here that are currently in flood zone X, but they're not included into the shaded area of City of St. Augustine. You also have this area of St. Johns County unincorporated. Whenever it comes down to these two areas, whether it's St. Johns County unincorporated, City of St. Augustine Beach, or City of St. Augustine, it's a question. Now, typically when they are in those areas, I find that most of the properties are in flood zone X, but at the end of the day, if you want to know, reach out to me. I have a really great insurance guy, Justin Thompson at Brightway Insurance. He's a stud. He'll get back to you normally within a couple hours with a roundabout quote of what it should be. And also if it's in a flood zone or not. And what I will say about these areas is that if they're typically in the St. John's unincorporated area or City of St. Augustine Beach, I'm finding that these homes are in flood zone X, so it's not much of a worry. But at the end of the day, we want to confirm that before you make one of the largest purchases of your life. And the next section of this video is going to be new construction. And this is one of the reasons that I chose 28 Riverstrand Lane is because it is a new construction home. And I wanted to give you guys a full, bird's eye view of what a transaction would look like here in the area. But the thing to know about new construction is that it is a huge part of our market. As of right now here in St. Johns County, we have roughly 3,700 homes available, and a quarter of the homes that are available are new construction homes. And that's a great thing if you are looking to buy a home in the area because those guys are offering some of the best deals in the market, whether it's an interest rate buy down or they're going to pay your closing costs or they're going to give you a design center incentive. They are throwing deals out the window every single day to people that want to raise their hand and take it. I was just helping a buyer who purchased a home in E-Town by David Weekley. It was around $600,000 when you include the lot and the base model of the home. They were offering $40,000 in incentives at the design center that was already included in that $600,000 price. So that's a big incentive right off the bat because most people spend about 10% of the purchase price of the property at the design center, putting money back into the home. So $40,000 right off the bat, we asked them for an additional $10,000, and then we also asked them for 3% in closing costs on the property. So in total, we asked them for about an additional $28,000 based off that $600,000 house. The 3% closing cost is going to be $18,000 and the $10,000 in the design center. And they agreed to it. So they're under contract and they're building a home from lot in one of the most desirable areas in Southside Jacksonville. So as I mentioned before, new construction is a huge part of our market. So that means that it's built to the newest codes, so that insurance is going to be cheaper. More than likely, it's going to be in flood zone X, so you're not going to have to pay for flood insurance. And normally the taxes are going to be, they're going to be what they are, right? It's easier to figure out when it's a new home versus a homesteaded property. But the really interesting thing that I came across when I was looking at the market of new construction in St. Johns County specifically, it is a huge portion of our closings. I'm gonna read my data right here, okay? So in St. Johns County, we have 3,465 active homes on the market, and 851 of them are new construction homes. And that comes out to, I think it's like 24.5%, but around 25% of our market is new build homes, which is pretty staggering. I should also mention that like probably 80 to 90% of the inventory in our area was built after 2002. And then if you're looking for like an older home with more charm, it's only really going to be around the historic section of St. Augustine downtown and also throughout Jacksonville. But with that being said, the closings is the thing that really interests me. So over the past 6 months, we've had 3,732 closed homes in total, right? When we break that down to new construction, we had 1,423 new builds that closed within that time. That's 38% of our closings over the past 6 months have been new construction. And why is that? It's the incentives. Which leads us to our next point, which is going to be incentives. And incentives are important to you as a buyer because it's essentially saying like the seller is willing to give you money to buy their house. So whether it's a new construction home builder or it's just someone who is trying to sell their home on their own, they're saying, hey, we're flexible and maybe we don't negotiate on price, but we negotiate on concessions. So if you want to buy my house for $500,000, I'll give you, let's say 3% of the purchase price, $15,000, so that you can pay your closing costs and not come out of pocket for that money. For the seller, the net is the same, essentially, if you would just lower the price by $15,000. And with how our market went in 2022, appraisals really shouldn't be a problem in this scenario. So it's important for you as a buyer to know because that's going to keep more money in your pocket today. And if you can ask for more money, some people can. Depending on your loan type, you can ask for up to 6% in closing costs. You can actually use that money to buy your rate down if you're just looking at a resale home in the market. So like we talked about with Lennar, they're offering incentives as well. And they're offering a lot better incentives than what me as a seller could do because they have a lot larger profit margin than an individual homeowner does. 38% of the closings over the past 6 months were new construction. That's almost half of the closings here in the area, guy. That's pretty crazy to think about. And that's because builders like Lennar are offering on FHA loans 4.99%, on conventional loans are offering 5.5%. That's a great interest rate over 30 years, especially when you're comparing it to a 6.5% or a 7% interest rate. But on top of that, you're also getting a new home. And oh, by the way, they're going to pay your closing costs as well. So the money that you have to come out of pocket just to close on your home, which is typically about 3.5% of your purchase price. So if you're buying a $500,000 home, think it's going to be somewhere between $16,000 and $18,000. That's cash money out of your pocket aside from your down payment that the builder's saying, hey, I'm gonna give it to you right here. But the good thing to know is that incentives are happening whether it's a resale or new construction across 39% of our market. So that's a little bit less than half of the people here saying, hey, we're willing to wheel and deal to sell this house. And that's great for you as a buyer. And that leads us to our next point, which I think is also very important when you're looking to buy a home here in 2025, is that our inventory has gone up quite a bit since the pandemic years. And that's also to be expected. So let's take a look at the data here. So what I did is I went back to 2022 and I looked at our active inventory tracker. And if you take a look at February 2022, we had roughly over 500 homes for our area here in St. Johns County. This was a crazy time in the market. Prices were appreciating, percentages each and every month. There were double-digit appreciation year over year. It was not a healthy real estate market unless you were selling your house. But on the verse side, if you're selling, you're normally buying. So you sold, you made a whole bunch of money, but then you went on the backside and bought, and you had to spend a bunch of money. So we've seen that our inventory has increased almost 4 times that amount, which that falls in line completely with all the doom and gloomers that we've seen on YouTube or on the other news sites that are saying like, hey, Florida's inventory is becoming a crisis. Prices are going to start going down. You're seeing 50% price cuts. You're seeing inventory skyrocket 1,000%. And there is some truth to that. You can see this graph that our inventory has increased pretty significantly. But the best thing to do is take a look and zoom out just a little bit to see where we actually stand. So what I did is I went back all the way to 2008, just so we can get a good idea, because that was obviously a huge problem in the economy here locally, but also nationally. I wanted to go all the way back to 2008 and just show you where inventory has gone since then. So if you take a look at 2008, you can see that we have roughly under 3,000 homes. It peaked in 2010 when we went over 3,000 homes, and then it started to trickle down until we got to 2016. Then it kind of went between 2,000 and 2,500 homes all the way up until the pandemic. And then once the pandemic happened, there was a lot of fear in the market. Homes weren't on the market. People didn't want people coming through their homes. So inventory dropped off of a cliff, and we saw 2020, 2021, and 2022 fuel our real estate market here and pricing in the area. Competition was wild. If you didn't see a house that day, you were getting beat. If you didn't put an offer in that day, you're getting beat For many of my clients, I had to put 6 to 10 offers in just for them to win one home. It was a nightmare for me. It was honestly not fun at all. It was not fun for you as a buyer. The only person it was really fun for was the seller, because they could get multiple offers and get more money for their house than they expect. So now we're taking a look at our inventory here in February 2025, and we're in the same position as we were pre-pandemic. And I think that's something to note, is that prior to the pandemic, our market was appreciating at a good clip, 3 to 5% year over year, which is healthy. Once the pandemic happened, we literally had like a 20% appreciation year over year. That's not healthy at all. It's not good for anyone. There's a whole bunch of issues that come along with that, and it was not a fun time in real estate. So my point with this is that there is more inventory on the market, which is a good thing if you are looking to buy a house, because you have more options. And then also you can use those options to compete against each other. You have two homes that you're really interested in the same neighborhood. They both know about each other, right? And you're like, you know what? I'm in between. I'm looking at this one. I might go to this one. I don't know. That also means that you can put an offer on this one and say, hey, you know what? There's a house over here. If you're not going to negotiate with me, I'll just go over here because I like this house just as well. In the pandemic days, you didn't have that option. A lot of people made decisions just because they're like, I need to get my foot in the door. I need to get into a house with a 3% interest rate. So they compromise on a lot of things that they want. In today's market, you don't have to compromise as much. And guys, that is it. Those are the 5 things that you need to know if you're looking to buy a home here in St. Augustine in 2025. If you have any other questions regarding the market here in St. Augustine, inventory, incentives, new construction, whatever that is, reach out to me and my team. All we try to do is give you the information so that you can make an educated decision on what you want to do, which is buy, sell, or invest here in Northeastern Florida. Until next time, guys.